get it full love.
I feel like that's the same on anything though. History or something like
Did make me immediately think, oh shit.
I don't know if it's gonna be open, but there's a place called Zombie Tacos and there's a.
So he handed it to me, and I just started hammering on CJ. Yeah, and then I'm trying to remember.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Steve Shorn. I'm with Humana, and we were proud to host the AWS meetup this month. I recognize several of you guys from the meetup last month. I thought that was a good kickoff for this users group. Big thanks to Kevin Lewis and his team for getting this started back up, and we're excited to participate in this series. So with that, Kevin, over to you and
Thanks.
AWS.
And thanks to Humana for hosting. This facility is pretty amazing. There's chips and food and cookies and stuff back there that we didn't have to do anything for. Thanks, Steve and Humana. So Wes is going to take over. He works for a professional services organization. And of course, the topic today is CDK. But I also wanted to reinforce and share our vision for the group. We expect this to evolve over time, and we expect your feedback. One thing that's very Amazonian is thriving on and craving feedback. So Nick's going to send another survey out after this for topics you might want to discuss or ideas you might have. It's all on the table. But it's all about building a community, which is why we will almost always, or as far as when we're running it, have a social event afterward, gaining skills. So, Nora was talking earlier about she's going through another certification, and so is Patrick, and that's part of this too. And a lot of the folks, I called out Dan in the back, who has like half a dozen and 2 different applications. So like some of us have been through a bunch and can help you do that. You're probably building cool things you want to talk about, and maybe you have skills that aren't matching where you are today. It's about building a community, keeping together, learning from you, and listening, and have you all drive it. Remember this last time. We're going to go to the Troll Pub. I'll buy the first round. Hopefully it's not as big of a boondoggle as the last time when we all lined up and then the guy was getting us 1 beer at a time. I called him and let him know like 30 people were going to show up. So they said, just go to the bar. The bartenders will be ready. They didn't ask me where I worked or my name or anything, but it'll be better than last time. Okay, so here's the series of discussions. The top is what we have scheduled, and this was totally reordered based off your feedback. So keep it coming. This is today. Security is going to be October. Kubernetes EKS November. A roundtable in December. So a lot of the Amazon folks will get up and you can ask us questions. You can submit them in advance. We'll probably have like a fishbowl. You can write them down. You can just raise your hand. Talk about how Dan got all of his certifications or what it's like to work in the cloud if you haven't done it. It's all on the table. And it would be great. Tell us what you're working on. And anything you might want to do, if there's something cool that you're doing at your job that you think others would, or if it's a problem you're trying to solve and you want to lead the discussion, it's totally open. Then we have kind of the potpourri mix of all the rest of the stuff. Any questions there? I think we're all on the same page. And Wes, you're up, man.
Let's do it. Awesome. Thank you all for having me. Quick favor. There are 3 empty chairs right here. If anyone would like to make sure we can all, there's a format to this that I'm going to talk about later. So if anyone from the back wants to come up, fill these 3 seats, that would be amazing.
There we go.
Perfect. Got 1.
There we go.
2 more. Oh, we got 2. All right. 1 more.
Okay.
1 more. All right. I'm going to point at someone. Oh, let's do it. All right. So let me get started here. So make sure all this still works. Broke yet? This is exciting. All right. Cool. So, thanks for having me. My name is Wes Eklund. I'm an SDE within ProServe Customer Engineering. And by feedback, we're going to be talking about CDK today. All right, so agenda. I'm just going to introduce myself and the org I'm in very briefly. Just talk about what is CDK. Let's go over a little bit of CloudFormation because knowing that will help us a lot in this chat. Going over core CDK concepts. We'll go through an example architecture and infrastructure and CDK app. And then some additional resources. The format for today, I do things a little bit differently. Instead of thinking of this as like a presentation or a briefing, I want you to think of this as like a discussion. So at any time, if you have a question, a comment, or you want to bring up something you've done, just interrupt and blurt it out, and we can chat about it. So I have enough content for probably like, I made my content so we kind of can have a conversation, and think of the slides as like we're facilitating the topics versus you just listening. Sound good? Awesome. Cool. So I've been with Amazon Web Services for about 1.5 years. Before that, I was exclusively in startups. So the last one was Lifeline's Neuro, med device startup here in town. If you know where Story is, they're based on the 3rd floor of that building. Really cool stuff with detecting and predicting seizure states, and kind of bringing EEG, which is analyzing brain waves, to the cloud. You'd be surprised how many of these various medical devices will still burn to disk and give the patient the disk and say, don't lose this. So, you know, I think we can do better. So that was that. And then before that, I was at Generation Tux, a suit and tuxedo rental startup, no brick and mortar, a lot of tech to kind of make that work. How do you fit someone without ever physically seeing them? A lot of cool AI, ML technologies to help make that happen. Yeah, and interest, I love orienteering. Have a house in Old Louisville that's a fixer-upper, and it's a good nightmare, rewarding nightmare. And then we're in Louisville, so who doesn't love whiskey? AWS customer engineering. So we're a relatively young org. We're about 2 years old, and essentially our offering is engineering teams as a service. So we're a 2-pizza team, all full of SDEs, and we'll go into a company and get fully embedded into their systems, their auth, their email, and we'll build something for you from scratch, leveraging kind of the Amazon way, Amazon software engineering principles. So some of our customers, NFL, AT&T, lots of others, petroleum, energy space, we're big into right now. But yeah, it's really rewarding work. You get to kind of see not just AWS tools, but you can actually see like enterprise scale implementation. So yeah, that's us. All right, so show of hands, who uses CDK for production infrastructure? Raise your hand. Okay.
Halfway.
Okay, halfway, getting there. Okay. Who has done like a CDK like Hello World or like tinkered with it with like personal projects? Okay, a few folks. Okay. I'm gonna have to like walk so I can make sure I see. Okay, cool. Who uses CloudFormation for their production infrastructure? Okay, cool. Good to know. So that's really exciting. So
Terraform?
oh yes,
Any Terraform fan?
Lumi, anyone? Okay. Terraform. All right, some. Okay. All right, cool. So we have good foundations to learn and discuss. So I'll be looking for people to speak up if they have questions or they tell me I'm wrong. So I'm looking for feedback. All right, so what is CDK? So this is the kind of the textbook definition. CDK provides a high-level object-oriented abstraction to define AWS resources imperatively, and that's key. Imperatively, we'll talk about that again later, using popular programming languages. So a little under the hood, there's a package called JSII that allows the teams kind of contracts for various CDK constructs, which I'll talk about later, and then just using the build system, generate NPM packages for TypeScript, or generate packages for Python or C#. So it's really exciting that, sure, there are DSLs out there that you can use with YAML and JSON, but having your preferred language as your entry point for CDK has been super popular. So talking more about these high-level programming languages, what's really cool about CDK is that now you're bringing developers and engineers closer to your infrastructure. Now, instead of a cloud architect managing lots of YAML or lots of JSON, now you can bring more full-stack folks and kind of share the burden of kind of managing and operating your AWS resources. And then, now that we're leveraging a high-level programming language, now we can use object-oriented design to kind of build various pieces of your infrastructure and kind of like build on top of that, kind of have like this Lego block setup that's been really popular instead of having lots of YAML and JSON. You're gonna hear me say lots of YAML and JSON just because it's such a pain point when you're at scale. I like CDK, yeah. Any questions so far? I noticed people aren't speaking up yet, so I'm gonna start calling on people to kind of get this format rolling.
You said it was a pain point, but don't you want to roll your YAML into your CDK? Isn't that fun?
Roll your YAML into your CDK. So have YAML structures that then generate using JSII TypeScript constructs and then back to, yeah. I think we might be going somewhere. Because it's funny, because there's always these pendulum swings of declarative versus imperative and the pros and cons. I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years down the road, people are like, this imperative stuff is not fun. We need to go back. All the mutations. So if you don't know who this person is, quite the visionary with lots of AWS services over the years, talking about cloud primitives. He loves CDK. He had a whole section in his keynote, I think 2 years ago, dedicated to talking about CDK and the benefits and kind of just talking about abstractions that we deal with in software engineering on a daily basis and how this is leveraging the best, for now, the best abstraction for managing resources. And one of the things that I really love about working in CDK every day with my customer is employing CI/CD, employing gates, employing, I'm saying that right, employing, using, there we go. Unit test, having unit test coverage over your CDK resources is really cool. Using aspects to say your resources need to be named in this way, it has to have these properties, and shifting all of that all of those controls left to not even go through CI. So there's a tool that we use called CDK nag that's really helpful for us. And it's essentially it's running the generated cloud formation, which I'll talk about, against common rule sets for things like HIPAA, PCI compliance, some of the things needed to get ready for FedRAMP. So you can kind of like shift security left using these high-level constructs and then write tests to say, I'm only going to deploy secure infrastructure. So that's been a huge time saver and powerful way to kind of be proactive about security. The Amazon security is job one. So any way we can be proactive instead of catching something in some security incident, it's a no-brainer.
Can you create your own custom organization rule sets?
Yes, you can. It's not very easy right now. It is an open source CDK nag, but you can. And you can, so that's the CDK nag tool. You can have custom rule sets, but then if you have like your own explicit security controls, you can write unit tests just like you would unit test any logic in a high level language, right? To say your construct has to have these things, right?
Right. You just need to be able to enforce it across all like teams that are implementing their own CDK.
Yeah, you would need some sort of process management, bring awareness, everyone align for your CI/CD pipeline.
And you need to keep it as left shifted as possible.
Yes, that piece of it is still kind of early days as far as the robustness of the security controls, but all across ProServe, a lot of government customers, they're all craving it.
Okay.
So it's coming. Yeah. Yeah, good question. Anything else?
So as far as the programming languages that supported, does it have kind of equal support for kind of, major languages like in the top, I would say top, but commonly used languages like top?
Right now, it's TypeScript, Python, C#, Java. Oh, yeah, thank you, go. Yep. So I don't know if if there's plans to add more, but those are supported right now. So, good question. Okay, so before we talk about kind of core concepts, I just want to give kind of a refresh. We need a little bit of a primer on CloudFormation. So I talked earlier about declarative versus imperative code, and CloudFormation is a declarative way where essentially you're describing a recipe of the AWS resources that you want to deploy and manage. So this may be hard to see for some folks, but you can write it in either YAML or JSON. It gets put into an S3 bucket. CloudFormation can then read that, validate it, and then the output are these CloudFormation stacks that then spin up those resources for you. Make sense? So I have an example here of what you might be looking at. This is in YAML, so this shows we got cut off on some sort of S3 bucket policy, and we can see here there's a my EC2 instance, and you can just see various properties that you're defining for this EC2. And this is what you could see potentially at scale, hundreds if not thousands of files that describe all of your resources. That can kind of be a pain to manage, especially if someone's just getting into cloud architecture and just learning and they need to persist some sort of recipe for their resources, and then they come look at tens of thousands of lines and thousands of files. Like, how do you make sense of that, right? Okay, so let's talk about CDK. So the core piece that we'll need to understand here to continue is knowing what a construct is. So think of a construct as a single Lego block or an abstraction of a Lego block. And that encapsulates what CloudFormation sees as like, okay, I'm going to stand up the stack and the resources. So there are 3 levels of CDK constructs. Now L1, I've put CFN resources here. Think of L1 as like a one-to-one mapping to a CloudFormation resource. That gets updated the fastest. If you understand the CloudFormation resource for that, or that type for that resource, the L1 construct is an exact match to that. Okay. So if let's say the CDK team it's essentially just like a bare bones, you are confident that if you write an L1 construct yourself, like a custom resource or something like that, that will map to exactly what CloudFormation knows of AWS resources. L2, I've dubbed an intent-based resources. And that is essentially the CDK team. They have decided that there's a certain behavior, a certain way that you will probably interact with this resource, and they're going to try and make it easier for you. So data types like date time is kind of a pain, so they'll make it easier for you in an L2 resource. That one is slower than the L1, but the L2s are really nice to work with. There might be some bugs that there might be breaking changes. There's a whole thing I won't get into with version 1 and version 2. Think of L2s as like, if it's supported and it works properly, you want to use L2 as like your starter block of a resource. I think I have a snippet, yeah. So like, I want an S3 bucket. You should use the L2 construct for that. EC2, you should probably use the L2 construct for that, unless it doesn't support something you need. And then L3 this is where we get into what a company could consider IP. And that's essentially various patterns for how you as your team sets up infrastructure. So this can be groups of L2s together. This could be bringing in your own proprietary data for this L3. So you can think of L3s as like, this is a logical business piece or app that you want to maybe make more of, or you want to distribute this across the company for other people to use. A lot of companies are setting up private repositories for L3 constructs for their needs. Does that make sense? Cool. Yep.
How specific are the L3s usually? Is it like, we're gonna do like a group of EC2s and some databases, or like this is like a whole app functionality?
Both.
Whatever you feel like.
It's up to you. What's the delineation there? It's purely your choice. So what Lego set do you want to build? So,
So you were talking about using a L3 repo. What's the easiest way to get that back into a new project if you're not bundling it into like a JPM package?
So I don't know offhand the NPM way, but there's a project called Slate for NuGet or C# libraries. Where essentially, it's put into an S3 bucket, and then Slate will point to that as a NuGet repo. That's how you can keep it private. And other teams that have authorization auth to get into that bucket can then use Slate to. Gotcha. That's how you can distribute it. I'm sure there are lots of different private repositories for NPM, like those kind of offerings. I don't know off the top of my head. But yeah, good question. Other questions? All right. Well, once we go through the code, I think you'll see what an L3 is, and you'll see some L2s. It'll make sense. So here's a snippet of an L2 S3 bucket. It's literally this easy. I want a new bucket. There's a this, that's the scope that will take in various like deployment roles, execution roles, name it. And then this object here can have various properties in it. And so I decided that I only needed one custom property and I wanted it to be versioned. The rest are like default properties. And if I had another bucket in there, we could say that this is technically an L3. I have a group of L2s. This is my pattern. This is my app. And you can use, all the great things of high-level programming languages like conditions based on things in parameter store, or loop over and generate lots of resources, everything that we get from our languages today. So that's where the power starts to come in. Start making other stacks and build on top of them. Cool. Well, let's go into some code. And fingers crossed to the I say the RNG gods in video gaming, the random number generator gods. Hopefully my luck is good today. RNG gods. Okay. So what I'm going to be showcasing is a project that is in the CDK workshop. So I'll have a QR code at the end if you want to go take a look. Then you can see exactly what this code is and what we're trying to accomplish. Has anyone looked at the CDK workshop? You have? Okay, cool. So if you tell me I'm wrong on something, you
I don't know
spell
if
it out.
I've looked at it that close,
Oh.
but it is very good.
So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna make an API, API gateway, and every time that we hit that API, we are gonna increment a counter in a DynamoDB table. So pretty simple. No auth today. But yeah, that's what we'll do. Let's make sure. Yeah. Oh, God. I put it in all caps to bring out the fear of the RNG gods playing tribute. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of setup to make sure you all can see. How is this as far as font size? Can everyone see this? Yes? What if I switch files? Can everyone see this? Okay, I'm gonna take silence as a yes. We can see everything. Okay. Oh yeah, that's perfect. That's a good size. Okay. Perfect. So I'm gonna go over this repo. I think recording or sharing is probably taxing. Yeah, okay. So what we'll do while that's loading is I'm gonna go through the CLI. So I have a directory here. Let's make that a little bigger. I know. I know it did. Okay. So in the documentation, you'll see instructions for how to download the CLI. And what you have to do is you'll have to get set up with your account. For this example, you're gonna need a administrator role. I can talk about later why we shouldn't do that, but for the sake of this, we're just gonna use the administrator role. So I have the CLI installed. We can see CDK there. We have the CDK workshop. And even before you even have any code, there is a init, CDK init that will set up some of like the boilerplate that you'll need to get started. And so the first thing that you'll need to run is CDK Bootstrap. And this is the number one thing that I pray to the RNG gods for. So what this is doing is it is setting up an execution role, it's setting up a code pipeline, setting up an S3 bucket, and essentially every time you deploy your CDK code, the cloud formation templates are going to go into this bucket, and then code pipeline is going to go run the cloud formation stacks. And so this is kind of like the core piece, and you can start to see some of the resources that are getting created to help us with setup here. So you can see the cloud formation execution role, staging bucket, lookup role. So these are all the things that's needed to essentially have a separate pipeline to continuously provision, deploy, make changes to your infrastructure. So while that's going, okay, WebStorm came back. I'm gonna kill some things. Hopefully we don't run into this issue again.
So I don't remember having to do that. He said it's because CJ had already done it. CJ.
Let's get that. Okay, so it's been bootstrapped. So what's been created here? So I've kind of talked about it already, but I'll go ahead and show you for CloudFormation. We can see we have the CDK toolkit stack that was created, and then we can see so we can see all the things that were created. These are all the things that's needed for your CDK project. So we won't go into diving into IAM roles and all that's needed. These are just the dependencies that's needed for CDK. Now that we have that, now let's go back to the code. So that's kind of hard to see. So I'm actually just going to do that because we're gonna have to, I want to show the tree. Okay. Yeah, tree's bigger. Okay. So this is the entry point in the bin folder. All these folders are set up when you do CDK init. And you could name this whatever you want, but essentially what we're referring to is CDK workshop stack. That's this guy right here. And we're gonna say, okay, new CDK workshop stack. I want to call it AWS MeetUp hit counter. Okay, so let's go into here. So this is a stack, and the scope, it's getting information from the CDK app. So this would be getting the execution role that we just created, everything from Bootstrap. It's going to have that scope. We're going to create a new Lambda function. It's a serverless function. It's going to allow us to do compute. We set the runtime node. We're going to get code from the asset here in the Lambda. And the handler is going to be hello.handler. Then we're going to create a new hit counter. So this is where you can start to see, oh, now we're having building blocks here. So I've created this stack, which has the DynamoDB table, has the Lambda function for the handler, and we're going to grant read-write permissions for the Lambda function to actually increment our DynamoDB table to persist our count. So security and least privilege is also out of scope. If you want to go deep on the granting process in CDK, it can use some improvements. I would say if you're going to have production infrastructure use CDK, I would understand exactly what this is doing and make sure it's kind of goes along your security controls for your company. And if not, you might need to do some custom stuff there. So just a call out here. Okay. So you can see that is a stack of resources. That is a building block. And we can make as many of these as we want now. I can loop over like a list of things and say create new hit counters. This is where you can start to see, how do I create big architectures, have big solutions with very little code. Right? You're using these blocks, you're using these abstractions. This is where the power comes in. So here we have a API gateway. We have a REST API here, and the handler, the endpoint for it, is going to call the hello with counter.handler. And then this table viewer, I didn't really talk about this. This is actually a third-party package. So someone made an L3 and made it public in a repo. And we've brought it in here. We have a table viewer, CDK Dynamo table viewer. I'm going to show you what that is here later. But I'm grabbing that open source L3 and I'm just using it in my infrastructure. So yeah. So then in here, I'm just going to briefly touch on what our lambdas are doing. So here's one hello. This is just the endpoint for the API gateway. And this is the Lambda, the hit counter. We get clients for Dynamo and Lambda, and this is where we're actually incrementing the Dynamo table. So we have a table name, we have a key, we have some Dynamo specific context there. And then call downstream Lambda function and capture the response. So that's all this Lambda is doing, and then you can see some logging here. So this is it. This is our code. The stack here, that was 30 lines. Our hit counter L3, that was 40 lines. So not counting the Lambda logic, our infrastructure is about 80 lines of code. So not bad. And then you can see here, this is using the old example. There's one example where you had to make a queue. But here's where you can use, since this is in TypeScript, we can use assertions. If you're familiar with Jest, you can kind of just write really clean unit tests here to kind of assert over various properties that you need, security concerns, governance and compliance, identity, and just validate that you're setting up the infrastructure correctly. So go Go ahead.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head. I remember reading a while back, there was the ratio of lines of CDK code versus CloudFormation. Do you remember that number? It was something like
it's
amazingly
something-
big.
yeah.
Like yeah, so that's 70 lines of CDK code is a lot in CloudFormation. And to me, that was the thing that got me excited about CDK. It's like so much less typing, right? So, I wish I knew the number. I can't remember what the number was, but it was some impressive number of the ratio of lines of CDK to CloudFormation.
Well, let's take a look at the CloudFormation then. So that's a good call. So let's go back to our terminal here. We're gonna do CDK synth, which is a command that will essentially generate CloudFormation templates based on the constructs that we have here. Okay, so we come back in here. There's a folder here called cdk.out. And some of these files are more of like CDK things. You can see this tree.json. So this is kind of a bad example because in YAML, it would be less lines. But you know, 1600 is still a lot. So I just get excited just looking at the line count. Remember, yeah, it bundles up the zips, I think, for the Lambda functions. But yeah, it bundles everything that CloudFormation will need to spin up that infrastructure. So yeah. Do we want to see if we can deploy it? This has worked multiple times. The only thing that I was having issues with was the bootstrap. That was the only one that I was. Okay, so in the CLI here, it's done CDK synth, and it is actually checking to see what needs to be updated, what is going to be created, so we can see IAM policy changes here. One thing I did not mention, I kind of inferred it. We see here that there is a service role. Oh no, there's a CloudWatch role. So CloudWatch logging that's created here. I never mentioned CloudWatch once. Where is CloudWatch coming from? I'm making a new Lambda REST API. So CDK, this L2 construct is doing things kind of for you and like to help you to kind of set up other infrastructure that you may not be thinking about. So it's great to kind of get started because if you're just doing CloudFormation, it's hard to know like, okay, I need these Lambda basic execution rules. I need these API gateway push to cloud watch logs. What else do we have here? We have these STS assume roles for the Lambda. There's quite a lot that's happening here under the hood. We have the invoke function, the allow on the API gateway that's set up. This is kind of where that line where I showed also with the read write grants. I mean, all of that is in here under the hood that you don't know about. It's kind of hard to see here. So yeah, that's kind of awesome. So let's deploy. And then what I'm going to do is once we have the endpoint up, I'm actually going to put that endpoint in a bit.ly, and we're just gonna. You all should just hit it, and we'll just see the table viewer just working. So I should make the back URL. What should we call it? Call it I don't know. We'll call it like what? Like Lou AWS. We'll just say that. So get your phone, your browsers ready for bit.ly/blue AWS. So as soon as I get that endpoint, I'll make that bit.ly. So you start to see the progress here. I saw the DynamoDB table, some roles.
Question.
Yep.
Could you go back to the code for a sec?
Sure.
So I'm trying to understand like what's the difference between all the L1, 2, 3 here. So like Lambda REST API, that would be an L2 construct.
Yep.
And then that contains a bunch of other L1 constructs inside of it. Or
There may be other L2s in there. This is a great question. So I think there might be L2s.
so like a
in
Lambda
there,
function
but then
itself.
under that, there are L1s.
Would a Lambda function itself just be an L1 or would that be another L2
There's an
construct?
L2 for Lambda.
Okay. So what would be the difference between something that
So
would be an L1 and something that would be an L2?
don't quote me here. So usually what you can do to find L1s is you do a CFN prefix. Everything in here is a L1.
Gotcha.
Good question. API v2. So I'm wondering here if I do API v2. Oh, yeah. What's interesting about the L1s and L2s, it's also a different like object-oriented type. So I don't even know what I would do here to say I want a REST API. Yeah, but in the docs you'll see CFN API v2. How do you make a REST API?
Then would the whole stack itself be considered a level 3 object?
So how does the CDK interface with like AWS config rules that maybe your security team have set on resources that auto remediate or have policies to deny the creation of certain resources with certain configurations?
So coming back to L2 constructs and what's supported, we would need to go and look and see like, is AWS config an L2? Or should we just have a parameter store that has those values in our stack here and go grab that? That specifically, L2 support for config, I'm not sure.
So I'm really curious, like during the deploy step, because that's when those configs are gonna actually have an impact on the resources. So you might define something that's against policy here. Is there a way to know about it before deploy, or is there a way to know that these configs are gonna change something by auto remediation?
Yes, so I'm not a config expert, but I know with Security Hub, everything, all of the alerts that we got for Security Hub were all retro. It was only till the resources were stood up that Security Hub would then go and search and see, oh, no, you're not compliant in something.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And so this is where CDK nag comes in. So we use that heavily to try and be proactive.
That was my original question. I was gonna ask it during the NAG section. So does that actually run the full stack, the NAG's framework that you're talking about?
The full stack,
Well, does it let you know about those security?
it'll fail the build if you've configured nag and you say, I want these security rule sets.
Okay,
It'll fail the pipeline.
nice.
Our customer loves CDK nag, so we can be proactive. And ever since we implemented it, we've never gotten a Security Hub alert. So I would rather be proactive than reactive.
Well, yeah, that's the problem with a lot of infrastructure as code frameworks is they're separate from your security policy. So you end up with non-compliant infrastructure because the people doing the development and deployment aren't the people that do the policy writing, and the communication between the two is alerts and emails and things like that.
And then it's like, it's hard to, the developers, it's hard because it's hard to get a sense of priority. You get all these alerts, there's no like direct communication, they're not integrated with the team unless you have a embedded security engineer. In our situation with our customer, when their IT policies, when they have new policies, it comes down to us as actual user stories. Hey, you need to add this compliance to your CDK NAG rule sets. So they tell us what the requirement is, and then the developer owns adding that to CI.
So you don't have to rewrite the rule set though, right? You don't have to maintain two different copies of the same policy, one in the NAG framework or
So
do?
there's publicly available rule sets, and there's one for like common compliance, PCI, FedRAMP, but you can write your own custom one. So if your company has its own rule set,
If they wrote their own rule set in config, they would have to also maintain a separate copy of that in the NAG, or are you saying that you can just say load this rule set?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought you were saying.
So we have an endpoint. So let's this guy drop it in here. Way. Come on. Okay. All right. So we're gonna call it, what did we say? Lou AWS. Has been edited. So that should work. So I'm gonna go to it once. Hello world, you've arrived.
Yeah, I got it.
Sweet. All right, show of hands. Who's all going? Yeah, we have a few of us. All right. Now let's check out this table viewer endpoint. 23 hits already. This isn't a fancy UI. 27. 33. It's going up. So yeah, we just described infrastructure using a high-level language. Ran one command, does all this stuff under the hood, CloudFormation, and now we have infrastructure and it's running. So, 62. Okay, everyone stop. Yeah, so that's the demo. The RNG gods we're good on. Nothing happened. We're a few minutes, so I'm just gonna. I have. Do you want to bet that's the wrong one? Yep. So I'm gonna put up some QR codes. Anyone is interested. All right, so if you want to learn more about the security aspects of using CDK, and if you have custom controls that you need to follow, or if you just have different governance or segregation of duties in your company, I talked earlier about the administrator role that CDK Bootstrap wants by default. I gave a whole talk for CDK Day this year, talking all about CDK strategies for large enterprises. So if you liked this one, definitely go check out that one for sure. And happy to answer any questions you may have specifically on some of the topics I cover there. The CDK documentation, and then the workshop that this code is based off of. So, cool. And we have 1 minute left, so we got Awesome.
Feel free to hang, ask Wes questions. There's some Amazonians back here. I'll head to the Troll Pub and open the tab, and we'll see you guys there.